How does it feel when the person you called your biggest mistake serves you divorce papers in front of your friends? I thought humiliating my husband at our dinner party would make me feel powerful. Instead, the next day, I watched my entire life unravel when he calmly delivered his revenge, all within the law. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The wine had been flowing freely that Saturday evening, and I felt invincible. Our suburban 3-bedroom home buzzed with conversation as my sister Jess and her husband Simon sat across from me at our mahogany dining table. The overhead chandelier cast a warm glow over the remnants of dinner, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. "Honestly, Orinthia, I don't know how you do it," Jess said, swirling her third glass of Chardonnay. Her perfectly manicured nails clicked against the crystal stem as she gestured toward the kitchen where Henry was loading the dishwasher. "Living with someone so predictable," I laughed, a sound that came out sharper than intended. Predictable is putting it mildly. "Do you know what he did last weekend? Organized our spice rack alphabetically." "Who does that?" Simon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between me and the kitchen doorway. "Maybe he was just trying to help." "Help?" I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "Simon, the man color-coded our Netflix queue. He made a spreadsheet for our grocery shopping." "A spreadsheet? For milk and bread?" Jess leaned forward conspiratorially. "Remember when you first started dating him? You said he was stable and reliable. I told you then that sounded like code for boring." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. You were right. Marrying Henry was probably the biggest mistake of my life. The kitchen sound stopped abruptly. The gentle clinking of plates ceased, and I knew Henry had heard every word. A small part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but the larger part, the part fueled by wine and my sister's validation, felt justified. "I mean, look at him," I continued, emboldened by Jess's encouraging nods. 35 years old, and he still asks his mother for advice about everything. Last month he called Marjorie to ask if he should buy regular or premium gas. "For our Honda Civic." Jess burst into laughter. "You're kidding." I wish I was. And don't get me started on his idea of a wild Friday night, debugging code and watching documentaries about ancient civilizations. Simon cleared his throat. "Orinthia, maybe you should..." "Should what?" "Pretend I'm happy. Pretend that watching him reorganize his sock drawer is the highlight of my week." I took another sip of wine, feeling reckless. At least some people know how to have fun. Some people know how to make a woman feel alive. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Jess raised an eyebrow, and I saw understanding flash in her eyes. She knew about Milo, had been encouraging me to explore my options for months. "Good for you," Jess said quietly, raising her glass in a mock toast. "Life's too short to waste it on the wrong person." That's when Henry appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space between the kitchen and dining room. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and his blue button-down shirt had water spots from washing dishes. He looked tired, older than his 35 years. "I think I'll head to bed," he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. "Early morning tomorrow." I felt a surge of irritation. "It's only 9:30, Henry. Our guests are still here." "I can see that." His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something I'd never seen before, not hurt, but resignation. "Enjoy your evening." He turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. As he reached the bottom step, our 8-year-old daughter Ava appeared at the top of the staircase in her pink pajamas. "Daddy, is everything okay? You all sound upset down there." Henry's expression softened immediately. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just grown-up talk. Go back to bed." But Ava's dark eyes, so much like Henry's, found mine across the room. Even at 8, she was perceptive enough to sense the tension crackling through our house. Her small face crumpled slightly, and she disappeared back into her room without another word. "Well, that was dramatic," I said to my remaining guests, trying to recapture the earlier mood. But Simon was already standing, reaching for his jacket. "I think we should probably head home too," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Thanks for dinner, Orinthia." Jess shot him an annoyed look. "We just got here." "We've been here for 3 hours, Jess, and I have an early meeting Monday." As they gathered their things, I felt the evening's confidence beginning to ebb. The house felt different somehow, quieter and more hollow. After they left, I climbed the stairs to find Henry's side of the bed empty, the covers unturned. Down the hall, I could hear him moving around in the guest room. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself he was being dramatic, just like always. But as I lay in our king-sized bed alone, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of Ava's face at the top of the stairs, or the resignation in Henry's eyes when he'd looked at me across the dinner table. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my messages until I found Milo's number. Maybe he was still working at the Lantern. Maybe he could help me forget the strange, hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. But even as I typed and deleted several messages, I couldn't quite silence the voice in the back of my mind, asking if I'd gone too far tonight. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzly, matching my mood as I sat in my office cubicle at Henderson and Associates. The weekend's events felt surreal in the harsh fluorescent lighting of my workplace. I'd spent Sunday avoiding Henry, who had taken Ava to his mother's house for the afternoon. When they returned, he'd been polite but distant, and I'd retreated to our bedroom early, claiming a headache. Now, surrounded by filing cabinets and the steady hum of office life, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Milo's contact. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began typing. "Hey, stranger. Rough weekend. Could use some cheering up. Free for lunch today." The response came back within minutes. "Always free for you, beautiful. The usual place at noon." A flutter of excitement mixed with guilt in my stomach. "Perfect. Can't wait to see you." "Everything okay at home?" came his follow-up message. I glanced around the office, making sure no one was watching before typing back. "Same old story. He just doesn't understand me the way you do." "His loss. See you soon." The heart emoji made me smile despite myself. This was what I needed. Someone who appreciated me, who made me feel desirable and interesting instead of like a household appliance. "Orinthia?" My coworker Janet's voice made me jump. "The Henderson files are ready for your review." "Thanks," I said, quickly closing my messages and accepting the stack of manila folders. But my mind wasn't on quarterly reports or client invoices. It was on Milo's easy smile and the way he always knew exactly what to say to make me feel better about myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Jess. "Hope you're feeling better about everything after Saturday. You deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for living your truth." Living my truth, I liked that phrase. It made everything feel justified, like I was being brave instead of whatever this actually was. Another buzz, this time from Ava's school. "Hi, Mrs. Vale, this is Ava's teacher. She seemed a bit withdrawn this morning and asked to call home during lunch. Is everything all right at home? Please call when you get a chance." I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. Ava had always been sensitive, picking up on tensions that most kids her age would miss. But surely she was too young to understand what was really happening between Henry and me. I set the phone aside and tried to focus on work, but concentration proved impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself crafting and deleting messages to Milo, each one more flirtatious than the last. Finally, at 11:45, I gathered my purse and headed for the elevator. "Taking lunch," I called to Janet, who barely looked up from her computer. The Lantern sat on the corner of 5th and Main, a cozy gastropub with exposed brick walls and dim lighting that made everyone look more attractive. Milo was already there when I arrived, sitting in our usual booth near the back, his sandy hair catching the light from the vintage fixtures overhead. "There's my favorite office manager," he said, standing to give me a hug that lasted just a beat too long. He smelled like cologne and possibility. "Flattery will get you everywhere," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "Rough weekend, you said? Want to talk about it?" And suddenly, I did. The words poured out, Henry's coldness, his mother's constant interference, the way he made me feel like I was slowly disappearing into suburban mediocrity. Milo listened with the kind of attention Henry hadn't given me in years, nodding at all the right moments, his green eyes never leaving my face. "You deserve so much better than that," he said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "You're vibrant and beautiful and full of life. He's an idiot if he can't see that." The warmth of his palm against mine sent electricity up my arm. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd met you first. Maybe it's not too late to find out," he said quietly. We were interrupted by my phone buzzing insistently. Ava's school again. I declined the call, but it immediately rang again. "I should probably take this," I said reluctantly. "Mrs. Vale? This is Principal Morrison. Ava is in my office asking to go home. She says she has a stomachache, but I suspect she's upset about something. Her father is listed as the primary emergency contact, but he's not answering. Can you come pick her up?" My heart sank. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Everything okay?" Milo asked as I hung up. "My daughter's having some kind of crisis at school. I have to go." "Kids are resilient," he said, but I caught a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Rain check on dessert?" I nodded, gathering my things. As I stood to leave, he caught my hand again. "Orinthia, don't let anyone make you feel guilty for being happy. You have every right to live your life." The drive to Ava's school was a blur of guilt and rationalization. By the time I reached the principal's office, I'd almost convinced myself that Ava's upset had nothing to do with Saturday night. Kids got stomachaches all the time. But when I saw her sitting in the chair beside Principal Morrison's desk, her small frame hunched over and her dark hair falling across her face, I knew better. "Mommy," she said quietly when she saw me, "can we go home?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you feeling sick?" She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. As we walked to the car, she slipped her small hand into mine. "Mommy, are you and Daddy getting divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What? No, honey, why would you ask that?" "Because you said marrying Daddy was a mistake, and Tommy's parents said that before they got divorced." I stopped walking, kneeling down to her level in the school parking lot. "Ava, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're upset. Daddy and I are just going through a rough patch." But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. And looking into my daughter's worried eyes, I felt the first real crack in the armor of justification I'd built around my actions. The drive home was silent, except for Ava's occasional sniffles. When we pulled into our driveway, Henry's car was already there. He must have come home early when the school couldn't reach him. He met us at the door, his face creased with concern. "Is she okay?" "Just a stomachache," I said, but his eyes searched mine for the truth. As Ava ran upstairs to her room, Henry and I stood in the foyer, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "The school said she was asking about divorce," he said quietly. "Kids hear things and blow them out of proportion." "Do they?" His voice was steady, but I caught the edge underneath. Or do they hear exactly what's being said? Before I could answer, my phone chimed with a text. Without thinking, I glanced at it. Another message from Milo. "Hope everything's okay with the little one. Thinking of you." Henry's eyes flicked to my phone screen, and I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I need to get back to work," I said quickly, shoving the phone into my purse. "Of course you do," he replied, but something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was a new quality to his voice, a kind of quiet determination I'd never heard before. As I drove back to the office, I tried to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the last 24 hours, but I couldn't quite convince myself that it was nothing. By Wednesday evening, I'd managed to push my concerns about Ava and Henry to the back of my mind. Milo had been texting me all day, and we'd made plans to meet at the Lantern after work. I told Henry I had to work late on a project deadline, a lie that came easier each time I told it. The bar was busier than usual, filled with the after-work crowd unwinding from their corporate days. Milo was behind the bar, his sleeves rolled up as he mixed drinks with practiced efficiency. When he saw me, his face lit up with that crooked smile that never failed to make my pulse quicken. "Hey, beautiful," he called over the noise. "Give me 5 minutes to finish up here, then I'm all yours." I found an empty stool at the far end of the bar and ordered a cosmopolitan, feeling sophisticated and rebellious. This was who I really was, not the suburban mom worried about school pickup times and soccer practice schedules, but a woman who could command attention in a crowded bar. "Rough day?" the businessman next to me asked, clearly trying to start a conversation. "Nothing a good drink can't fix," I replied with a smile, enjoying the attention. When Milo finally made his way over, he leaned across the bar, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You look amazing tonight. That dress is incredible on you." I'd chosen the black cocktail dress deliberately, something Henry had never even commented on, but that made me feel powerful and desirable. "You like it? I wasn't sure if it was too much for a Wednesday." "It's perfect. You're perfect." His hand found mine across the bar top. "I've been thinking about you all day." The words sent warmth spreading through my chest. This was what I'd been missing. Someone who noticed me, who made me feel like the center of their universe instead of just another item on a to-do list. "I've been thinking about you too," I admitted, my voice dropping to a more intimate level. We were lost in conversation, his stories about his weekend trip to the coast mixing with my complaints about Henry's latest obsession with reorganizing the garage, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Orinthia." I turned to find Henry standing 3 feet away, his work clothes slightly wrinkled, his hair disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes moved from my face to Milo's hand covering mine, and I saw something flicker across his expression. "Henry." I pulled my hand back instinctively. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Ava was asking for you. When I called your office, they said you'd left hours ago." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I told you I had to work late." "At a bar?" Milo straightened up, his bartender's instincts kicking in. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," Henry said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just a husband looking for his wife." "Your wife?" Milo's eyebrows rose slightly. I'd told him I was married, of course, but seeing Henry in person seemed to make it more real for him. "Yes, his wife," I said, irritation flaring. "Henry, you're being ridiculous. I'm allowed to have a drink with a friend." "A friend?" Henry's gaze moved to Milo, taking in his good looks and easy charm. "Is that what we're calling it?" The conversation around us had quieted, other patrons sensing drama. I felt exposed under their curious stares, but instead of backing down, I felt my defenses rising. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked, my voice rising. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air like a bomb. Several people at nearby tables turned to stare openly now. I felt Milo tense beside me, but instead of shame, I felt a surge of anger. "You're being paranoid and controlling," I said loudly enough for half the bar to hear. "Just because you don't know how to have fun doesn't mean everyone else is doing something wrong." "Orinthia." "No, Henry, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of you tracking my every move, questioning everything I do. Maybe if you paid half as much attention to making me happy as you do to your precious spreadsheets, I wouldn't need to find conversation elsewhere." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was too angry to care. Around us, the bar had gone almost completely quiet. Even the music seemed muted. You're right, Henry said quietly. I should have paid more attention. Something in his tone made me pause, but I was too far gone to stop now. And maybe if you were half as interesting as... I gestured toward Milo. As some people, I wouldn't feel like I'm slowly dying of boredom in our house. Henry nodded slowly, as if he was processing information rather than being hurt by it. I see. Do you? Because I've been trying to tell you for months that I'm not happy, but you just keep organizing things and making lists and pretending everything is fine. You're absolutely right, he said again. Then, to my surprise, he pulled out his phone and took several photos. Of me, of Milo, of the bar receipt sitting on the counter with the timestamp clearly visible. What are you doing? I demanded. Paying attention, he replied calmly. Finally. He turned to Milo, who had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. Just so we're clear, you know she's married, right? With a daughter? Milo shifted uncomfortably. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. No trouble, Henry said. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page about what's happening here. He looked at me one more time, and I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not hurt, but something colder and more calculating. Enjoy your evening, he said, and walked out of the bar. The silence that followed was deafening. Gradually, conversations resumed around us, but I could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. Milo cleared his throat awkwardly. That was intense. He's always been dramatic, I said, but my voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. He'll get over it. But as I reached for my drink, my hands were trembling slightly. There had been something different about Henry tonight, something I'd never seen before. And the way he'd taken those photos... Maybe I should head home, I said suddenly. Are you sure? We could go somewhere else, somewhere more private. The suggestion that would have thrilled me an hour earlier now made me feel vaguely nauseous. I think I need to check on Ava. The drive home was a blur of second-guessing and rationalization. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd almost convinced myself that Henry was just having a tantrum, that everything would blow over by morning. But when I walked into our house, I found it eerily quiet. Henry's car was in the garage, but there was no sign of him or Ava downstairs. I climbed the stairs to find Ava's room empty, her bed unslept in. A note on my nightstand, written in Henry's careful handwriting, explained everything. Ava and I are staying at my mother's tonight. We need some space to think. We'll talk tomorrow. I crumpled the note in my fist, anger and something that might have been fear warring in my chest. How dare he take Ava away from me? How dare he make me look like the villain when all I'd done was have a drink with a friend? But as I lay in our empty bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me, I couldn't shake the image of Henry's face in the bar, the careful way he'd taken those photos, the calm resignation in his voice when he'd said he should have paid more attention. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if I'd seriously underestimated my husband. I woke up Thursday morning to an empty house and 17 missed calls. 12 were from Marjorie, Henry's mother. 3 were from my own mother. 2 were from numbers I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the voicemails. Marjorie's voice was tight with controlled fury. Orinthia, I don't know what you think you're doing, but my son and granddaughter showed up on my doorstep last night in tears. Ava was asking why Mommy doesn't love Daddy anymore. Call me back immediately. My mother's message was typically passive-aggressive. Honey, Marjorie called me this morning. She seemed very upset about something. I told her these things usually work themselves out, but maybe you should call her back. I deleted the messages from the unknown numbers without listening to them. The house felt different in the morning light, bigger and more hollow than usual. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to figure out what to do next. Henry was being dramatic, I told myself. He'd bring Ava home after school, and we'd work this out like adults. But when I called his cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. When I called his office, his assistant said he was working from home today. When I called Marjorie's house, she answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, her voice arctic. "Marjorie, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been no misunderstanding. I understand perfectly. I understand that my son came home last night looking like someone had died. I understand that my 8-year-old granddaughter asked me if her parents were getting divorced because Mommy said marrying Daddy was a mistake. I understand that you were photographed in a bar with another man while your husband was home worried sick about you." My blood ran cold. "Photographed?" "Henry showed me the pictures, Orinthia. You and that bartender, holding hands, looking very cozy, while your daughter was at home asking for her mother. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you're having an affair. Are you going to tell me that's not what it is?" The direct question hung between us. I could lie, but something in Marjorie's tone told me she already knew the truth. "My marriage to Henry is complicated," I said finally. "Complicated." Her voice was flat. "That's what you're calling it. You don't understand what it's like, Marjorie. Henry is a good man, but he's not what I need. We're not compatible anymore. So you decided to find compatibility with someone else while you're still married to my son. I never meant for it to go this far." "How far has it gone, Orinthia?" I couldn't answer that. The silence stretched between us until Marjorie spoke again. "I'm picking Ava up from school today. She'll stay here until you and Henry figure out what you're doing with your lives. You can't just take my daughter. I'm not taking her. I'm providing her with a stable environment while her parents sort out their mess. Unless you think bringing her home to watch you and Henry scream at each other is better for her." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, fury and panic warring in my chest. How dare she? How dare any of them act like I was some kind of monster for being unhappy? I called Jess, needing someone on my side. "Oh, honey," she said when I explained the situation. "They're all overreacting. So you had drinks with a friend. Big deal. Henry's being controlling, and his mother is just protecting her precious baby boy." That's what I thought, but they're making it sound like I'm some kind of terrible person. You're not terrible. You're human. You have needs that aren't being met, and you found someone who appreciates you. There's nothing wrong with that. But they have pictures, Jess. Henry took pictures at the bar. Pictures of what? You having a drink? You're allowed to have friends, Orinthia. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking you've done something wrong. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. I felt my righteous anger returning, pushing down the guilt and uncertainty. You're right. I'm not going to let them make me feel guilty for being happy. Exactly. And if Henry can't handle the fact that you have a life outside of your marriage, that's his problem. After we hung up, I felt more centered. I would go to Marjorie's house and get Ava. I would explain to Henry that I was willing to work on our marriage, but not if he was going to be controlling and dramatic about every little thing. The drive to Marjorie's took 20 minutes through suburban streets, lined with maple trees, just beginning to turn autumn colors. Her house was a modest ranch-style home where Henry had grown up, filled with family photos and the smell of whatever she was always baking. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I would say. When the door opened, it wasn't Marjorie who greeted me. It was Henry. "We need to talk," he said simply. "Where's Ava?" "At school. Mum picked her up yesterday, but I drove her this morning. I wanted her to have as normal a day as possible." "Good. Then you can bring her home tonight and we can discuss this like adults." Henry stepped aside to let me in, but his expression didn't change. "Come in. Mum's in the kitchen." Marjorie was indeed in the kitchen, pulling a tray of cookies from the oven with more force than necessary. She looked up when I entered, her grey hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her blue eyes, so much like Henry's, cold as winter. "Orinthia, please sit down." The three of us arranged ourselves around her kitchen table, like negotiators preparing for a hostile takeover. The cookies sat cooling between us, their cheerful chocolate chips at odds with the tension in the room. "I want to start by saying that I never intended for things to get this far," I began, but Henry held up a hand. "Please, Let me go first. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table between us. I've been doing some thinking since last night. About our marriage, about what you said at dinner on Saturday, about what I saw at the bar. Henry, I'm not finished. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made me close my mouth. I've also been doing some research about our finances, our communications, our schedules over the past 6 months. He swiped to open a folder on his phone, and I saw screenshots of text messages. My text messages. To Milo. How did you get those? We share a phone plan, Orinthia. We have shared cloud storage. I pay the bills, so I have access to the account records. He scrolled through several more screenshots. This one's from 3 weeks ago. Can't wait to see you tonight. Henry thinks I'm at book club. This one from last month. Wish I could wake up next to you instead of him. My mouth went dry. You've been spying on me. I've been trying to understand why my wife has been lying to me for months. He set the phone down and looked at me directly. The question is, what do we do now? Marjorie spoke for the first time since I'd sat down. What we do now is think about Ava. Of course I'm thinking about Ava. She's my daughter. Then act like it. Marjorie's voice was sharp. Stop acting like a teenager and start acting like a mother. I don't have to listen to this. I started to stand, but Henry's next word stopped me. Actually, you do, because I've made an appointment with a lawyer for tomorrow morning, and I think you should know what I'm going to tell him. The room went very quiet. Even the sound of the refrigerator humming seemed loud. You're threatening me. I'm informing you. There's a difference. Henry's voice remained steady. I'm going to tell him about the affair, about the lies, about the fact that our daughter is asking if we're getting divorced because you called marrying me the biggest mistake of your life. Henry, please, can't we work this out? Go to counseling or something? For the first time, his composure cracked slightly. I asked you to go to counseling 8 months ago. You said we didn't need it. I asked you what was wrong 6 months ago when you started staying out late. You said I was being paranoid. I asked you last month if you were happy in our marriage. You said everything was fine. Each word hit like a physical blow because they were all true. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself. Marjorie's voice cut through my protest. And in the process, you've hurt everyone who loves you. I looked between Henry and his mother, seeing something I'd never seen before. A united front. They'd made their decision about me, about our marriage, about everything. So what happens now? I asked quietly. Now, Henry said, you decide what kind of person you want to be, and what kind of mother. As I drove home from Marjorie's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I realized that everything I'd thought I had under control was spiraling away from me. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't sure I could get it back. Friday morning arrived grey and cold, matching the dread that had settled in my stomach overnight. I'd barely slept, alternating between anger at Henry's ultimatums and a growing fear about what a lawyer might actually be able to do with those text messages. I called in sick to work and spent the morning pacing our empty house, trying to figure out my next move. Every room seemed to echo with memories. Ava's artwork on the refrigerator, Henry's engineering textbook still stacked on his nightstand, the family photos lining the hallway that now felt like evidence of a life I was about to lose. At 10:30, I decided to drive to Henry's lawyer's office. If he was going to discuss our marriage with a stranger, I wanted to be there to defend myself. The law offices of Morrison, Klein and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that smelled like coffee and old carpet. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked up when I entered. Can I help you? I'm here to see, well, my husband is meeting with someone about our marriage. Henry Vale? Her expression shifted slightly. Are you Mrs. Vale? Yes. Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Morrison know you're here. The waiting room was decorated in soothing blues and greys, with magazines about parenting and home improvement scattered across the coffee table. I picked up a copy of Family Circle, but the words blurred together as I tried to read. Mrs. Vale? A tall man in his 40s appeared, wearing a navy suit and a cautious expression. I'm David Morrison. Your husband is in my office. Would you like to join us? I followed him down a hallway lined with diplomas and legal certificates. Henry was sitting across from Morrison's desk, a manila folder open in front of him. When he saw me, his expression didn't change. Orinthia, I wondered if you'd show up. This is my marriage too, Henry. I have a right to be here. Morrison gestured to the chair beside Henry. Please, sit down. I was just reviewing the documentation your husband brought. The folder was thick with papers, printed emails, bank statements, phone records, and what looked like a timeline written in Henry's precise handwriting. My stomach dropped as I recognized the scope of what he'd compiled. This is quite thorough, Morrison was saying. You've documented the affair extensively. I wanted to be sure I had all the facts, Henry replied. Henry, please, I said, reaching for his arm. Can't we talk about this privately? Do we really need lawyers involved? He looked at my hand on his arm, then gently moved away. We're past that point, Orinthia. Morrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Vale, I should inform you that your husband has presented substantial evidence of infidelity. Text messages, financial records showing unexplained expenses, location data from your shared phone plan showing visits to locations you didn't disclose. Those are private communications. Between you and your husband, yes, but when they document an extramarital affair, they become relevant to divorce proceedings. Morrison's voice was professional but not unkind. Your husband also has photographic evidence from Wednesday night's encounter at the bar. The photos were spread across Morrison's desk like playing cards, me and Milo holding hands, me laughing at something he'd said. The timestamp on the bar receipt showing I'd been there for 2 hours while Henry thought I was working late. I can explain all of this, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I'm sure you can, Morrison replied, but the question is whether an explanation changes the fundamental facts. Henry spoke for the first time since I'd sat down. I want to file for divorce, David, and I want primary custody of Ava. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking her away. I'm providing her with stability. Henry's voice was calm, but I could see the pain underneath. She's been having nightmares since Saturday night, Orinthia. She asked my mother if she did something wrong to make Mommy stop loving Daddy. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. I never meant for Ava to get hurt. But she did get hurt, and she'll keep getting hurt if this continues. Morrison leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Vale, I should tell you that in cases involving documented infidelity and child welfare concerns, courts tend to favor the non-cheating spouse in custody arrangements. Child welfare concerns? I'm a good mother. I'm sure you are, Morrison said gently, but bringing adult relationship drama into a child's life, exposing her to marital conflict, lying about your whereabouts, these are factors that courts consider when determining what's in a child's best interest. I looked at Henry, really looked at him, for the first time in months. His face was thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well for a while. When had that happened? When had I stopped noticing? Henry, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work things out for Ava's sake. You had an affair, Orinthia, for months. You lied to me, to our daughter, to everyone around us. You called marrying me the biggest mistake of your life in front of our friends. His voice remained steady, but his hands were clenched in his lap. How do we fix that? People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A series of choices, made over months, to prioritize your happiness over our family. Morrison cleared his throat again. I'm going to step out and let you two talk privately for a few minutes. But Mrs. Vale, I strongly suggest you consult with your own attorney before we proceed further. After he left, Henry and I sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of everything, the evidence, the lawyer, the reality of what was happening, settled over me like a heavy blanket. "I never wanted it to come to this," I said finally. "Neither did I." Henry's voice was quieter now, sadder. "I kept hoping you'd end it on your own, that you'd remember what we used to have together." "We can still have that." "No, we can't." He looked at me directly, and I saw something final in his expression. "You made your choice, Orinthia. Now I'm making mine." Morrison returned with a stack of papers. "These are the divorce and custody filings. Mrs. Vale, you have 30 days to respond through your own attorney. In the meantime, we're requesting that you move out of the family home to provide stability for Ava during this transition." "Move out? Where am I supposed to go?" "That's something you'll need to figure out," Henry said, "but you have until Sunday evening." As I sat in my car outside the law office, the divorce papers on the passenger seat beside me, I realized that everything I'd thought I wanted, freedom, excitement, someone who made me feel alive, was about to cost me everything I'd actually had. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't sure it had been worth it. Sunday evening came faster than I'd expected. I'd spent the weekend in a haze of packing, crying, and making phone calls to lawyers who all seemed to tell me the same thing. Henry had built an airtight case, and my options were limited. Jess had offered to let me stay in her guest room, but the enthusiasm she'd shown for my truth-living had dimmed considerably when she realized I was actually getting divorced. "Maybe you should try to work things out," she'd suggested hesitantly. "For Ava's sake." Too little, too late. I was folding the last of my clothes into suitcases when I heard cars pulling into the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I saw Henry's Honda followed by his mother's silver Buick and, to my surprise, a police cruiser. My hand started shaking as I zipped up the final suitcase. This was really happening. The doorbell rang, and I heard Henry's key in the lock immediately after, a courtesy notification rather than a request for entry. I made my way downstairs, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors that I'd picked out when we'd bought this house 6 years ago. Henry stood in the foyer with Officer Martinez, a middle-aged Hispanic woman whose presence made everything feel official and irreversible. Behind them, Marjorie waited with Ava, who clutched her grandmother's hand and wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Vale," Officer Martinez said professionally, "I'm here to ensure a peaceful transfer of personal belongings. Do you have everything you need?" "I think so," I managed. Henry stood on the porch with the clipboard like a polite stranger conducting an eviction. My clothes, my laptop, the painting from Santorini, everything listed, initialed, signed. Officer Martinez waited by the squad car in case someone forgot how to be civilized. Ava clung to Marjorie's leg. I knelt. "Can I have a hug goodbye?" She gave me the quickest one, arms barely touching, then stepped back to safety. Henry walked me to my car. "I never wanted the police here," he said. "I know," I whispered. "I did this." In the rear view, they looked perfect together. Henry, Ava, Marjorie, under the porch light. A family, just not mine anymore. Jess met me with wine and slogans about new chapters. I drank the wine. The slogans tasted like ash. Milo never called again. His last text, "Take care," was the most honest thing he ever sent. 6 months later, the judge stamped the decree. Primary custody, Henry. Supervised visits for me every other Saturday in a room that smelled like crayons and broken promises. 2 years after that, I watched Henry marry Sarah from the back row of the church, while Ava, my Ava, walked down the aisle scattering petals for her new mom. I cried in the parking lot, not because he moved on, but because they looked like the family we were supposed to be, and I was the one who tore up the picture. Ava is 10 now. She calls Sarah Mom, and me, Mom Orinthia. The distinction is small and surgical and permanent. Some nights I still sit in my apartment and replay. The moment I decided stable was the same as stifling. I was wrong. The man I called boring turned out to be the only one who ever really saw me. By the time I looked up to tell him, he'd already closed the door and locked it from the inside with kindness. I lost the life I didn't know I loved for a thrill that lasted exactly as long as it took him to stop texting back. That's the real story. Everything else is just the paperwork.